Hello, this is Vlad, and welcome to the interview of Crypto Insider. Today I'm going to be talking with Giacomo Zucco, who is a well-known Bitcoin maximalist and one of the few people who embrace the label of being a maximalist despite all the bad meanings that it might have. And that's something that we'll be discussing today. So hello, Giacomo.
Hi everybody. We're not so few. I mean, there is a lot of people that is self-labeling maximalist. But yeah,
It seems to be like a derogatory term on Twitter. And some people appropriate the idea and say, I'm also a maximalist, but at the same time, I also believe in Monero or in Litecoin or whatever. And I
yeah,
remember watching the last episode of Magical Crypto Friends, which is with Charlie Lee and Fluffy Pony and Whale Panda and Samson Mao. And at some point, they all said, we are actually Bitcoin maximalists in the sense that we want Bitcoin to succeed and we want it to be the best coin, but we don't want it to be the only one, or not necessarily. So do you think that there are layers to being a maximalist?
there certainly are, because the term itself was created in a pejorative form and derogatory form from Vitalik Buterin and others in order to represent this approach as basically wrong. So it was some kind of it was a blockchain slur, and some of us adopted that in order to diffuse the rhetorical attempt. And so right now everybody's using the term in different ways. I tried in Riga to give a presentation about a very, very scary, strict definition of maximalism with a lot of bad connotation in order to try to prove that even that very, very scary cult-like definition of maximalism is actually very, very close to what a cautious approach will be to this whole ecosystem. So yeah, there are like Fluffy Pony and Charlie Lee. They are people who are contributing somehow to Bitcoin. So in a way, I would say they are definitely Bitcoiners. I tend to use the term maximalism in order to imply that I really do not think that altcoins can succeed in general. So while I'm not sure that Bitcoin will succeed, I'm kind of sure, I mean, as sure as I am of other things, I'm sure that I don't know, the small private internet that you create in your garage is not going to take over the internet very, very
Mhm.
soon. In the same way, I'm kind of sure that altcoins cannot be sustainable and cannot deliver what they promise, while Bitcoin could very well fail itself. So right now, from a descriptive point of view, I am like a fiat money maximalist, meaning that I recognize that right now, US dollar is the money, unfortunately, is the kind of money people is using. It sucks because it's manipulated, inflated, difficult to transmit over the internet without third parties, and the third parties can censor you, they can spy on you, they can track you, they can enforce KYC, AML mafias. So it's a bad situation, but that's the descriptive reality. Bitcoin could maybe overthrow that. I hope that it will, and I think that there are very, very good chances it will. While altcoins, by definition, I think they cannot succeed.
I remember that last week I had an interview with Jimmy Song, and he had that controversial statement that it's a good idea to spend with your credit card and then pay with the Bitcoin that you have. And do you think that it's up to this point, it's a better idea to actually use fiat for your purchases and save your Bitcoin just for emergency spendings?
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, in the presentation of Riga about maximalism, I included also this part. So I argued that these points, of course, in a satirical kind of sarcastic way, but also seriously in a way with some nuances. I argued first my position about altcoins. Altcoins cannot succeed. Basically, altcoins are scam in a very loose definition of the term for some, in a very strict definition for some others. The second point was that any important change to the base rules of Bitcoin is also something that we should reject, and we should basically not accept. And the third point was about spending. The simplified triggering version of what I said is that pushing people to spend Bitcoin is a scam. The nuanced, detailed version will be that if we think Bitcoin can be a better form of money, during the process of monetization of Bitcoin, in which Bitcoin chooses to just be a digital collectible and start to become a store of value, and then a medium of exchange, and then eventually maybe even a unit of account, so it becomes really money. In this phase, it's reasonable to expect an appreciation of Bitcoin compared to fiat money. And even if Bitcoin doesn't appreciate, which is something it has to do if it's going to succeed, fiat money is by definition always depreciating as far as purchasing power is concerned. So fiat money is always debased, inflated, and depreciated over time. So if you have two kinds of money, both kind of accepted, let's assume first that you have two kinds of money accepted at the same rate in the market around you. And one money is going to be depreciated over time, and the other money is instead sun money. It cannot be arbitrarily inflated. It's very resistant to production. So you have hard money and easy money, and the market around you accept both at the same rate. Which one you should spend first? Of course, the easy money first. That's called Gresham law, but Gresham law is actually referred more specifically to legal tender and denominations, but we could call it maybe Thiers law, which is more proper. Thiers law says that the good money in store of value terms drives off the bad money, while Gresham law, simplified, says that the bad money in everyday purchases drives out the good money, which is instead hoarded and hodled and stored. So I agree with what Jimmy said, may be triggering, because we spent a lot of time in the early Bitcoin narrative about we should always use Bitcoin in the sense of spend Bitcoin, and we should hope for merchant adoption. But actually, that will kind of all fake. Every time we celebrated the merchant adoption of Bitcoin, we were actually celebrating some guy joining BitPay in order to receive Bitcoin from hodlers, from people believing in Bitcoin, and immediately sell Bitcoin at market price on the open market, actually depressing the price. It's not real adoption. While using Bitcoin to store your wealth, that's adoption. That's an actual use of Bitcoin. So I was saying before, assuming that the market is accepting both forms of money, the shitty devaluated money and the hard money, you should spend the first, the former first. But we are not even in that situation. We are in a situation in which the market usually do not even accept the hard money. So we have a strong hard money, which is not even very widely accepted, and fiat money, which is accepted everywhere basically, and it sucks by definition in order in storing wealth. So it's a no-brainer. You should spend first the shitty kind of money, which is depreciated and which everybody already accepts. Of course, there are some caveats here if we want to be super pedantic. If you only receive Bitcoin, if you are one of the lucky dudes that manage to be completely unbanked, post-bank, and you receive your wage in Bitcoin only, and you have 100% of your wealth in Bitcoin only, in that situation, you will spend Bitcoin. Or if you want to spend in one of those use cases that require, by definition, Bitcoin, because fiat money systems will not let you spend money that way. For example, you want to donate to WikiLeaks and you cannot use credit card. You want to buy recreative substances on the Silk Road, which are maybe legal in some country but illegal in some other country. You cannot use credit cards on PayPal or Apple Pay for that. So in that case, you spend Bitcoin because you don't have anything else to spend, or because that specific purchase cannot be performed using fiat money. And that's all the point of Bitcoin in the first place. So I think that the general statement by Jimmy is absolutely correct. I don't know why it triggers so much people. I mean, I know why, because we accepted the narrative that using Bitcoin is spending, while using money sometimes is about spending, but sometimes is about storing. And we accepted the narrative that people accepting Bitcoin with payment processor dumping on the market is a good thing, while it isn't. And we accepted and we forgot the points of Tier's law, then that says that you spend the shitty money first and the good money after.
So you're basically saying that you should be spending your Bitcoin cash?
Yeah, well, I did. I did. I took a while to split my Bitcoin Cash from my actual Bitcoin UTXO. So to split, it's an ugly term. I took a while to claim my Bitcoin Cash airdrop from using my Bitcoin UTXO. But because of privacy concerns and security concerns, many people gave up their privacy completely with these airdrops. For example, consolidating all their UTXO set into one maybe address of an exchange with name and surname and KYC identity. So many people did terrible things for their privacy with these airdrops. I took a while to collect it, but when I did, I spent it in order to buy Bitcoin first thing. So yes, if you have Bitcoin Cash or Bcash, you should use that way before Bitcoin. I completely agree.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to comment on another comment which I read on Twitter, because it's the most active place where people debate ideas which are not always maybe profound or meaningful in any way. But I think Jackson Palmer has at some point said that if you have the term maximalist in your description on Twitter, then you should replace it with close-minded.
No, I think that's actually completely nonsense. I mean, the term maximalist was created in order to represent people using basic logic and common sense about Bitcoin and altcoins as some kind of close-minded, cultish, intolerant sect. So that was the original design of the word, and we self-ironically adopted the word. And right now, people using the term Bitcoin maximalist in the description are mostly just signaling that they are using some kind of healthy skepticism, and they want extraordinary proofs in order to sustain extraordinary claims. Bitcoin itself was an extraordinary claim, and many people required a lot of evidence and a lot of explaining in order to accept that there was something possibly capable of overthrowing the fiat money system worldwide. So that was a very extraordinary claim. Where we still should adopt this claim to a certain degree, because nothing is certain. Bitcoin could still fail, but if you adopt a rational mindset and if you adopt any kind of healthy skepticism, then you know that the default approach should be that something extraordinary usually and too good to be true is usually too good to be true. So having thousands of different coins, each one serving the market as money, is a inconsistent scenario, because one point of money is that it is the most saleable good on the market, and the most saleable good is one. And in every kind of local market that you can imagine, there is one form of money that usually gets to include, gets to represent the best money, and usually cannibalizes the others. Sometimes you don't see that because you have external interferences, like for example nation states. They monopolize money, and they impose political money with legal tender. So you can see I mean, you could see one form of money in the old times, which was the gold standard, gold. Now you can see different forms of money, but that's because of political imposition of different nation states. But if you go to the free market, so if you also go to the black markets of many nation states, for example, Venezuela or Cuba or the Soviet Union before the Berlin Wall crashed down, then you could find the only one basically strong currency, that was the US dollar, being actually used instead of the depreciated alternative. So maximalism in this regard is just being realistic and expecting economical typical behaviors to still be in place, and do not expect extraordinary suspensions of laws of logic and economy. Also, there is also a point about skepticism about technological revolutions. Like, there is a very good essay by Andrew Polstra about altcoin. He published it like I think 3 years ago, and it was describing all the subtle, very small mistakes than people creating the first altcoins did, because creating a new crypto system is not easy, and it's a kind of a miracle that we have one that actually works. And miracles, they tend not to replicate very, very often. So I completely disagree with that statement. If you don't want to use the label maximalism because you don't want to basically concede this kind of negative depiction, then don't use that term. But people using that term to describe themselves are mostly just signaling that they are logical and reasonable.
Okay, so I will ask you one last question, which revolves around commenting on somebody else's comments. But I saw that Roger Ver was very critical of your PowerPoint presentation, and he precisely picked that slide, which was the most controversial about it. And I think it was the one in which you said that Bitcoin is the only legit cryptocurrency. Everything else is a scam. Don't trust anyone who tells you to sell your Bitcoin. Don't trade your Bitcoin, just hold it. And how did you feel when that went viral on Twitter?
Actually, not very happy, because the narrative in my presentation was studied. I would say it's probably overstating, because I created that the night before, as kind of always. But I was thinking at the presentation that I was going to give, and I was there was a path in my mind. Like, I will describe why I'm going to talk about Bitcoin maximalism. I will put here the most possible triggering and scary and the counterintuitive set of maximalist rules in order to trigger you, people of the audience, which, by the way, were people inside the conference of Baltic Only Badgers. So they were all already Bitcoin maximalists. So it was some kind of inside joke. So I want to represent what we all believe in the most possibly triggering kind of way, and then I will explain some logical assumption, and I will show you that the consequences of these logical assumptions, if they are not the triggering sentences that are wrote down, they are anyway counterintuitively, paradoxically, very, very similar to these general prima facie heuristics. The rules in the slide were basically everything which is not Bitcoin is a scam. Of course, so let's start with the title of the slide. The title of the slide were the five universal truths about Bitcoin. No, the four, universal truths about Bitcoin, which is itself mocking the Buddhist four universal truths. So the title itself was already an attempt to self-irony, in order to present that as a religious thing. You will not call something the four universal truth if it was not already some kind of somehow sarcastic. The first one was everything which is not Bitcoin is a scam. Of course, that cannot be taken literally. I mean, Linux is not Bitcoin, and it isn't a scam. Git is not Bitcoin, it isn't a scam. BitTorrent is not Bitcoin. Gold, physical gold, is not Bitcoin, it isn't a scam. My car, which even if it's not a Lambo, it's working very well. It's not a scam. So it's not literally everything, but everything which pretend to be something like Bitcoin or something like the next Bitcoin, using Bitcoin technology in improper ways in order to replicate the same kind of effect, enriching the creators, is prima facie, as a general heuristic, a scam until proven otherwise. That will be the nuanced definition. Of course, the simple definition is everything which is not Bitcoin is a scam. The second one was every attempt to change Bitcoin is a scam. Of course, neither these can be taken literally, like segregated witness or P2SH, maybe next on Schnorr or Sigash no input. They are changes to Bitcoin. But even when you implement the light network, even if you're not changing Bitcoin layer one, you are changing Bitcoin as a global as a global experience, as a global set of protocols. So of course we will change Bitcoin as a general experience for all the times being, and we will probably even change some more the base consensus with I hope very few and very slow last modification before reaching stability. So the scope, the goal of that second sentence was, you should think that every attempt at modifying Bitcoin is itself problematic and potentially dangerous and potentially an attack vector, and so we should also always prefer and protect status quo over any change until we get proven that the change is necessary and uncontentious and safe to deploy and tested, and so on and so on. So that your mindset should be, until proven otherwise, every attempt to fundamentally change the Bitcoin is something wrong. Even because if Bitcoin can change too much, the sound money characteristic has gone. Because if you can change the total supply, you don't have hard money anymore. If you can change maybe enforce blacklist or whitelist or KYC, the permissionless side of Bitcoin has gone. So there are some changes that will destroy Bitcoin's value proposition completely. Then there was a third truth, that was the one that we discussed before about Jimmy Song's triggering tweet, which is everybody who is trying to push you to spend Bitcoin is scamming you. There was a very good article by Michael Goldstein called everybody, or sorry, by Pierre, I guess, or no, it was Michael. Everyone is a scammer. Everyone is a scammer is a very good article on the Nakamoto Institute about the fact that when you have something like hard money, everybody wants you to spend and they want to hold. So it's a normal thing to try to trick others into spending a very valuable asset, and of course that's a user scam, which is or the word scam, which is a little bit loose and improper. And the last truth was, we should not be nice with scammers. Even these cannot be taken literally. I mean, I'm personally kind of nice with people that I consider doing very scammy things. Like when I meet Zucco Wilcox in a conference, he's a very nice guy, and I tend to be nice with him. But I think that Zcash is very unethical on different points of view, and it's very scammy in a way, that in the way it has been promoted for many reasons. So that's not literally either. But what I tried to convey with the last sentence was that we should append some social cost into social attacks on Bitcoin, because otherwise social attacks on Bitcoin, they carry zero technical cost. So there should be some kind of social protocol that makes expensive for the attacker to try to manipulate or distort or corrupt Bitcoin somehow. And especially because I mean, sometimes people think that if I call something a scam, it means that I want the government to step in banning that thing. It's the other way around. It's precisely because we don't want the government to step in, howsoever, that we need to create a self-regulating culture and attitude in which we enforce a very strict set of rules, and we keep ourselves to very high standard of ethics and technical precision, and we basically bash and mock and ridicule most of the scammy marketing, which is so common in other sectors. So in any sector which is not Bitcoin, I don't care very much if some marketing advertising is pushing some false narrative. But in Bitcoin, is very important, is more important to bash and mock and expose and debunk fake narratives, exactly because we don't want a regulator, we don't want consumer protection, we don't want any kind of legal restriction of liability. So the last sentence was basically, in the cypherpunk crypto anarchist model, you don't want the state to regulate stuff, but you do want people calling out lies or misconception or dishonest marketing. So to answer, I spoke a lot. Your question was very simple. How did I feel about that slide? That slide was not intended to be to go viral on Twitter, as it was a completely serious slide. That said, I think it was, I mean, it's okay like this. It was like a filter. People incapable on understanding or people incapable of looking for the context of the slide, and incapable to understand the irony of the title itself, and incapable to understand that these sentences, even if clearly exaggerated and hyperbolic, they are actually very close to a good prima facie heuristic in order to navigate this world. They are basically filtering themselves out from the conversation. So if you feel so much triggered by that slide, it's a good signal for me that I should not probably engage with you in conversation. So it's a time-saving anti-spam mechanism. So thank you, Roger. I'm okay with that.
That's a good answer. I actually wrote an article about this, that a few years ago, the Bitcoin community was consisting of some of the smartest people who are actually aware of the financial system, and they saw what happened in 2008, 2009 when the banks collapsed. And they had all these ideals of turning Bitcoin into the next big financial instrument of the world. But we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years how all this spirit has vanished. And we have people who actually expect from the SEC to give an approval to the ETF for Bitcoin and open trading desks. And that's so much against the spirit and the ethos of the early Bitcoin adopters who actually wanted to distance themselves from the banks. And what do you think happened in the process? Do we have too many greedy investors like the Forex guys who just stepped in and wanted to make as much money as they could, and they ended up holding bags?
So first of all, I don't completely agree with you that the original narrative was especially against the banks. It was especially against bailouts to banks, like the typical, the Genesis block newspaper title was about the chancellor on branch of a second bailout of banks. So the problem is not that we have this business called bank, which is a business consisting of people on the market, proposing to other people to store their value for them, or to invest their wealth, giving out loans, so managing credit and debit and matching the demand and supply of credit. So that's not an evil thing itself. The problem with banks is that just like many other fields of the market, like the military, the self-defense, or in many cases the healthcare, it has been completely hijacked by government monopolies that started to use this monopoly in order to promote exclusions, control, Orwellian surveillance, and of course taxation in the form of inflation, and manipulation in the form of management of interest rates. So I think that the original narrative, even if probably we intercepted, as a Bitcoin community, we did intercept some kind of anti-banks, meaning anti-rich rhetoric. So like some kind of Occupy Wall Street rhetoric, like you're a banker, you're rich, so you're evil. But the point was never actually that you cannot have a guy managing credit. The point was that the sector of credit and money and banking in general has been completely hijacked by the government. So there are now rules that, for example, if you try to donate to WikiLeaks, the government convinced or forced the banks to shut down your payment to WikiLeaks, or if you try to save your wealth from inflation, the banks will help the government to inflate using fractional reserve, or if you are trying to compete with the government, like with e-gold, the banks will help the government to shut you down. If you purchase goods and service, the banks will help the government to track you down and spy on you, and eventually punish you for your preferences. And especially the banks are betting financially. If they win, they get the profits. If they lose, the government will take money from other people in order to bail out the losers. So they can never lose, and so that generates a lot of moral hazard. And so the banks are and the financial sector in general, they are getting even more and more risky and unsustainable over time because of moral hazard created by bailouts. So Bitcoin was an antidote to that. Bitcoin was a way to disintermediate banks directly, because banks were corrupted by the violence of the state. The fact that some bank could maybe serve some Bitcoin investor and not Bitcoin user, but Bitcoin investor, is actually not so bad. I don't think that the SEC allowing a Bitcoin ETF or the Bitcoin future markets, they are not bad things per se. Bitcoin users, people that want to use Bitcoin to store wealth in an unconfiscatable way, they don't care about ETF. They will get Bitcoin because an ETF can be confiscated, while real Bitcoin cannot be confiscated. People who want to, again, donate to WikiLeaks or do or move money out of China, they don't need a Bitcoin ETF, because you cannot move a Bitcoin ETF out of China. You cannot use a Bitcoin ETF to donate to WikiLeaks. People who really need Bitcoin as a tool will use Bitcoin. But if somebody just wants to bet on the price of Bitcoin, I think that's good for us, because more demand for synthetic Bitcoin can anyway bring up the price. And I mean, I don't expect an old legacy investor, the guy who is used to take up the phone, call his banks and say, let's buy two shares of Apple, 3 barrels of oil, and 3 Bitcoins. This guy will never become a cypherpunk managing his own full node and his own private keys. He doesn't need it. This guy does not need permissionless finance. He's okay with permissionless finance. He just wants to speculate on the price. So I think there is nothing bad in permissionless finance allowing people to speculate on Bitcoin price. I think that's okay. The problem is that people is expecting the SEC or the other regulators to actually give a pass to all these ICO centralized and super easy to censor initiative. It's like, so the government is telling you that you cannot issue securities without following some kind of stupid regulation, which is very bad for financial exclusion and everything. But the government is forcing you to follow this regulation. Now you create your centralized ICO or altcoin, and suddenly you hope that the government is not going to enforce the same regulation on you only because you pretend to use the buzzwords like blockchain or crypto, but you are still completely centralized, completely censorable, but you hope that the government will not crack you down. And that's a little bit, I don't know if this fairy tale exists in every kind of culture. In Italy, we have it, the three little pigs. So you have
Oh, yes.
one pig that built, okay, you have it too. So you have this pig is building his home with straw, the second one with wood, and the third one with bricks. So the third one takes a lot of time. It's like he's the boring pig. He will have to study architecture. He will have to spend a lot of energy and money and time slowly building the brick house. The other, like the straw pig, the straw house pig, he will just do something quick, dirty, super effective, and he will dance all the time, mocking the brick house pig because he was faster and more effective. Altcoins and ICOs token are like that. Bitcoin has been built in order to resist the regulator wolf when it comes. So Bitcoin has been created in a way that when the wolf comes, he cannot bring the house down. While altcoins are just like the straw house. They have been built very quickly, very easily. You don't have all the hard things that you need in Bitcoin, so you can profit more and buy your Lamborghini. But when the wolf comes, they are now like with Ethereum. They are now hoping to keep the wolf calm using lobbyism or like asking, please do not censor us, which is completely nonsense.
You just gave me an idea for a little game that we can play, but if you don't want to, I'll just cut this from the final video. So I was thinking that I can read to you the names of the top 20 coins on CoinMarketCap, and you can tell me on a scale from 1 to 10 if they're scams or if they have some potential.
Absolutely, I mean.
Okay, so 1 means that it's very bad, and 10 means that it has very high potential. So Ethereum.
I would say 2. Very, very bad, especially because the thing that we call Ethereum now is actually the bailout version of Ethereum after the DAO fuck up. So I'm very, 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 very skeptical about Ethereum in general. So I would say 2.
Okay, XRP.
I would say 3, because even if the token itself is even worse than an Ether, is not even scarce, they are controlling all the supply. At least the platform Ripple itself, even if it has been sold dishonestly as something else, it is like a new version of Swift. Banks can use a new version of Swift. There's just no use for XRP token. So while the Ethereum infrastructure is completely useless, the Ripple infrastructure is centralized, legacy, but maybe useful. So I will say 3.
Okay, Bitcoin Cash.
That would be 1, because this is an explicit, unlike the others, this is an explicit attack on Bitcoin generated by an entity that tried to take over Bitcoin, Bitmain company, and sold on scam website that are trying to basically defraud Bitcoin newcomers, trying to sell this altcoin, calling it Bitcoin. So there is actually people, this is at the center of an attempt of defrauding people, of a realistic fraud attempt. Also, people associated, the people most important in the ecosystem of this altcoin are a con artist, Craig Wright, a literal con artist. At this point, it's almost funny to see Craig Wright, so no hard feelings toward him, but he is literally a con artist. The other ones are like Roger Ver, the guy scamming new buys, selling an altcoin as Bitcoin, so a very dishonest guy. The other one is Jian Wu, the guy who tried to control and hijack Bitcoin and failed. So after you see these, yeah, 1.
Okay, EOS.
Okay, EOS, I will give it, so EOS is bad because it's like the third scam in a row from Daniel Larimer. First, he scammed people with BitShares. Then he moved on to scam people with Steam, and then he moved on to scam people with EOS. But so it's like a serial scam. But this is actually better. So I'm not sure of the numbers I'm giving, but in a way, the fact that it's the third one is also, it also makes it like kind of honest. If you are so dumb to think that Danny Larimer is going to create something of value after the two scams in a row, probably you deserve to be scammed. So Larimer is just a professional. It does what it does. It scams people. At this point, if you're getting wrecked because you believe that EOS tokens can be the new Bitcoin, you probably deserve to get wrecked. Also, EOS architecture is mostly centralized, and unlike Ripple guys or Ethereum guys, they don't pretend to be much more decentralized than they are. So I will give them 4. It's completely useless because everything you can do with EOS, eventually you could do it with PayPal or similar, or with just a Node.js central site. So it's probably useless. There is this federation thing that is mostly useless in my opinion, but they are trying less hard to pretend to be decentralized than Ripple or Ethereum. So 4.
Okay, Stellar.
Stellar is still useless, so I can give it if I cannot give it a 6, which would be like a good enough mark. Let's say 5. Unlike EOS, it is not complete. It is not the production. It is not the product of a serial scammer. Unlike Ripple, they admitted centralization, while one of the first explicit differences between Stellar and the original that Stellar forked, which was Ripple, was a more honest approach toward their centralization. I don't think that you can use Stellar to do anything that you couldn't do on a centralized web server, but it's at least you're not wasting time and money on fake mining like in Ethereum or in Bcash. So I will give them 5. I didn't like, there was a post of actually a very, very good service, which is Keybase. And that post was pumping Stellar because Stellar gave a lot of money to the Keybase guys. And they were pumping Stellar with FUD, with lies about Bitcoin, energetic consumption and stuff like that. So I don't think the approach is completely honest, but I will give them a 5.
Litecoin.
Okay, so many of my friends, my maximalist friend, do not agree with me about this, but I will give Litecoin even a 7. Litecoin is useless as money. I don't think that you can use Litecoin instead of Bitcoin to do cheaper transaction. That doesn't make any sense, because you have to assume that you are storing your wealth in sound money, so Bitcoin, and the other part is also storing his wealth in sound money, so Bitcoin. So if you move Bitcoin from your core storage in order to buy Litecoin on a market, then transmit Litecoin, and then your counterparty has to sell Litecoin for Bitcoin on a market and transmit back Bitcoin in cold storage, you're basically, instead of just having one on-chain Bitcoin transaction, you are having 2 on-chain Bitcoin transaction plus market fees plus Litecoin transactions. So the idea that you can use Litecoin to do together with Bitcoin to do fast and cheap transaction is bullshit. The promotion of Litecoin as silver to Bitcoin gold doesn't make any sense. The reason people use the physical silver together with the physical gold was because there was a trade-off between transferability and divisibility, because gold is very, very bad for division. You cannot buy bread with a gold powder, so it cannot be divided, but it's very good to store your wealth in a compact way and to move your wealth, because you can move all your wealth with very few gold coins. Silver, on the other hand, was very bad for storing wealth and transporting wealth, but it was good for divisibility. People started to use both for a certain time because there was a trade-off. When people moved from physical gold to representative gold, banknotes, basically, silver as money disappeared from the market because you don't need it anymore. Bitcoin is completely divisible. So being Bitcoin divisible for a very, very good extent, you don't need silver to Bitcoin gold. So that said, Litecoin was one of the first altcoins, and that's a good thing because eventually I can imagine, I don't know, in year 2030, well, altcoins are not promoted as real money alternatives anymore, but maybe some altcoin can survive as a collectible because it has some historical value. So I can think that maybe Namecoin and Linecoin, the very first altcoins, maybe they could remain for historical value because they were the first scam coins. And if the collectible value is enough to make some miner mine some Litecoins sometimes, like one block every few weeks, then maybe the network can survive as a collectible. Also, the people promoting Litecoin, they are not promoting Litecoin by attacking Bitcoin or lying about Bitcoin mostly, or diminishing Bitcoin, or they're not trying to put obstacles in the mission of Bitcoin in order to profit. Mostly, like Charlie Lee is a good guy. I don't agree when he says that Bitcoin is silver, Litecoin is silver to Bitcoin gold. I don't agree when he says that Litecoin is a side chain to Bitcoin. That doesn't make any sense at all. But they are not aggressively lying against Bitcoin. They are one of the first, so you give them the benefit of the doubt, and maybe it will be a collectible. And some people think that Litecoin has a good value because it was used as a bad test for Bitcoin. And that could be a good argument. If you think about that, there was some FUD about SegWit being dangerous because the miners could just take the money out of your SegWit address. And that FUD was debunked on Litecoin because Litecoin basically adopted SegWit before, and nobody used SegWit in that way. So it was a empirical dismissal of that concern. So yeah, Litecoin has been used as a testnet for Bitcoin. So let's give it 7, not as money, but as a future collectible of an ancient past.
What about Tether? Should we discuss USDT, or you think it makes sense?
It does, and I will give it an 8. As long as the Tether company can resist and it doesn't get censored down, or it doesn't explode, or it doesn't fail because of, I don't know, they're using a full reserve bank. But this full reserve bank, I don't think they are storing physical cash in their caveau. So probably they are storing in full reserve liability of the local central bank of that state. So there could be some kind of fractional reserve problem there. Also, there could be like a legal breakdown on Tether because they are basically creating a service, a very useful service, in order to avoid KYC and AML restrictions. So you can buy Tether from the company, applying to complete KYC and AML, but then you can move this Tether on the secondary market. It could be a good way to buy Bitcoin, for example, from an exchange that cannot have a bank account. So Tether is a good strategy for regulatory arbitrage. It's probably not sustainable, but at least it's a centralized initiative which doesn't claim to be decentralized. So it's not like Ethereum or other stable coins. They admit what they are, and as long as they can exist without the government taking them down, they could be useful for traders or for buyers. So 8.
Cardano.
Cardano, I will give it let's say a 7, like Litecoin. I'm too good in this interview, probably. I don't know why, but I wanted to express so much opposition to the first one you named that I'm being very good with these ones. Cardano is a research project with a lot of academic effort I don't think it will never work in production. I don't think that proof of stake can work at scale in a secure way. I think there are logical problems with that. I think that the token Cardano was sold taking advantage of a crazy bubble market. So many people will get wrecked with the ADA token. That said, the technological part is, I mean, there is less bullshit in the Cardano technological development that in the, for example, Ethereum one. Charles Hosking is a little bit more serious about this stuff, I think, than people like Vitaly Buterin. So let's, maybe 7 is too much. Let's give it 6. Not too much. 5. Sorry, 5. Cardano
Okay,
5.
so we settled to 5.
Yeah.
What about Monero?
Monero, I would give probably a 9. It's probably the together with Namecoin. I would give probably an 8, just like Litecoin. Also to Sia Coin and to Namecoin. Interesting experiment, doing something interesting. There was no point to create a new money to do that. They should do projects using the money which already exists, which is Bitcoin. But at least the projects themselves are good, and people working on those projects are not trying to antagonize or to damage Bitcoin directly. They are not attacking Bitcoin. Most of the people working on Monero or Namecoin or Sia Coin are actually also active Bitcoin developers. So I will give this Namecoin, Sia Coin a 7 and Monero an 8 because other than being something similar to Sia Coin and the Namecoin in being a legit research experiment, even if the coin part is scam, because you shouldn't create a new monetary base to launch your experiment. You can create a two-way packet sidechain of Bitcoin when that technology is ready. When that's not ready, you can just create a proof of burn. So people burn Bitcoin in order to create this token. So it's one way. At least you are not inflating the supply. And you are not scamming people launching the new Bitcoin. Also, if you cannot do that, a UTXO airdrop like Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Gold, that itself, I mean, Bitcoin Cash has a lot of scammy parts, but that thing itself is not scammy. It's better than creating a new altcoin. Then there is the new altcoin created from scratch, and then the worst possible thing is the pre-mine and the ICO. So these projects, I would give them 7. Monero actually 8 because it has all the characteristics of these other projects that I mentioned, and maybe in the future Grain or Chia. Plus, people can actually use Monero in the real life with a use case right now. So I said before that it doesn't make sense to have Bitcoin, move Bitcoin to a market, sell for Litecoin, transact to save on fees, and then the merchant buy back Bitcoin. But it could make some sense if you sell Bitcoin, if you send Bitcoin to a market, sell it for Monero, send it with a confidential transaction with bulletproof and ring signature, and then the merchant will eventually change it back. Because maybe there are some configuration in which you are spending more as of time and fees, but at least you are purchasing privacy. I'm not 100% sure that these privacy features of Monero are completely sound, because, for example, yes, you have ring signatures and confidential transactions, but you also have smaller liquidity and so a smaller anonymity set. So there is less people using Monero, and so it's easier, even from a very, very obfuscated blockchain, to analyze behaviors with metadata and time linking and stuff than maybe it is on Bitcoin with a very, very clear text blockchain, but with a lot of users, so a lot of plausible deniability, especially with things like join market, CoinJoin, Tumblebeat, or centralized mixers, and or all the Samurai wallet privacy tricks and so on. So I'm not telling people to use Monero to be anonymous, because that could be actually counterproductive. But I know that some people taking responsibility for this are trying to use Monero as privacy coin, and that could make some sense. So let's give these guys 8.
Earlier, you said that BitTorrent is actually a legitimate technology, and do you think that Tron has become a better project after it bought BitTorrent?
Well, Tron didn't buy the BitTorrent protocol. They bought the BitTorrent company, which is just one random company creating a BitTorrent client. So BitTorrent, the company, is not BitTorrent, the protocol, more than Bitcoin.com is Bitcoin, the protocol. Actually, it's not that bad because at least the BitTorrent company is giving you a client for BitTorrent, not for a scammy alternative, while Bitcoin.com is trying to sell you a scammy alternative. But you have to imagine that the name of the company doesn't mean that Tron acquired the protocol. They acquired the company which created and sold or distributed anyway a client for BitTorrent. Why? Probably just because of marketing effort. I don't think there is something more serious around that. So no, I don't think that Tron is less scammy because they bought that company.
So what's your grade for Tron?
Let's say 3,
Three?
because it's 3 because it's as many later altcoins. They actually didn't have time to try to promote and to spread all the technical misconception and bullshit that Ripple or Ethereum guys did try to spread around. Tron is, yeah, uh, useless, of course, but I think it made less damage. So let's put it this way: people maybe bought Tron in order to make profit as a traders. Some of them at the beginning will, some of them eventually will get wrecked. It's okay. It's betting, basically. It's gambling. While there is people actually, companies actually convinced that the Ethereum blockchain makes any sense. And I think that's a wider and deeper damage than just some traders buying the Tron token and selling it. So that's why a little bit more open to that.
What about IOTA?
IOTA, it's, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it's a tool. It's like Ethereum. Yeah, maybe give those guys a 3. IOTA doesn't have anything to do with IoT, so they basically matched 2 buzzwords, the cryptocurrency buzzword with the IoT buzzword. But there's nothing in IOTA that makes any sense with IoT. They sold the token mostly leveraging fake or ambiguous or overblown announcements, like partnership with this and partnership with that. So that's very, very scammy. They created, they did something of they did the worst possible mistake you could do, trying to ship out their own from scratch, newly made cryptographic primitives, which is something you don't do, and it was broken. And when people started to say around that it was broken, they reacted in a very, very arrogant way. And that also there was some part of the code in which they claimed that there was like an anti open source cloning feature. There was some mistake, and the creators claimed that that mistake, that bug, was put there intentionally in order to prevent people from cloning IOTA. So that's, I mean, so much for the open source approach, putting intentional bugs in the source code. Very, very trustless. So it's bullshit. That said, the some of the ideas of IOTA are cool. Like I don't think that realistically balanced ternary number systems and calculation and computing will take over the binary, but balanced ternary is cool. I like it. And also transaction graphs instead of blockchains is something that has been studied in Bitcoin as well, under the name of Briding or Dogecoins and stuff like that since 2013. Actually, there is a very, very good presentation in Scaling Bitcoin by David Vorick, the creator of Siacoin, about braiding. Braiding is interesting as an experiment, as a concept. It doesn't work in practice. Like in IOTA, it doesn't work. It works only because it's centralized and they have a coordinator. And if they get rid of the centralized coordinator, they will just the graph will just diverge, as it happened anyway. So it doesn't work. So it's scammy. But I mean, at least they didn't do a bailout to their friends like Ethereum guys did with the Ethereum bailout edition. So maybe better than Ethereum. Let's give them a 3.
This is going to get so long, but I like it actually. I think I'm going to split this in 2 parts just so it's easier to watch. But
Sure.
let's go on. What about Dash?
Dash. Dash is a let's give it well, let's give it a 4, something like I would like this zone like Tron of things that are actually practically useless. They didn't shock me. They didn't shock me with super scammy things like the Ethereum bailout or the IOTA fake bug. So they didn't do anything explicitly scammy. I mean, maybe I give them a 3 because one of the things I hate when people is bullshitting about is privacy. Because if you're bullshitting about the price, people will buy it, then they will get wrecked, then they will complain, but I mean, their fault. But when you are bullshitting about privacy, people could actually get, I don't want to say killed, but yeah, people could get killed if they try to use, for example, Zcash or Dash or any other fake privacy coin in order to, for example, avoid the surveillance of some kind of autocratic regime. So people could get serious consequences if they use a fake privacy coin. There is I think that for people interested in understanding Dash a bit better, there's a good comparison of privacy coins by Aaron von Wirdum on Bitcoin Magazine. There is like a good comparison on Monero and Green and Zcash and Dash. So you can take a look at that. But yeah, Dash will stay probably on 3.
Do you think Binance Coin has any relevance whatsoever? It's just the metric which shows us that Binance is a successful exchange and they have managed to push a token which enables them to make cheaper transactions within their system. But do you think outside it that it has maybe any use or purpose?
So this is a little bit like Tether, even if a little bit worse. But the point is, I don't think that utility coins, utility tokens make any sense because a utility cannot grow in value in most of the cases when the business itself grows in value. So to give you an example, let's assume you are creating a telephone company, and before you launch the telephone company, you pre-sell on the market of airtime represented by tokens. These are utility tokens. The problem is it makes sense to use this token instead of Bitcoin because it's not money. You're not trying to recreate money. You are just representing airtime. But if your business is of a telephone company is successful, the reason that 1 minute of airtime in your company should be valuated by the market more. If anything, it will be valuated less because you will be able to save cost and give discounts because of basically economies of scale. So utility tokens that don't make any sense as an investment, and they are promoted as an investment. While what is called security tokens, especially if they are security tokens, they could be like tokens that give you a right to dividends or royalties from certain kind of business. So you get this token. When you get back, basically you can claim voting rights or loyalty, royalties or dividends or stuff like that. There are 2 things here. The bottom line is that this kind of thing is illegal because securities are regulated in most markets by evil regulators that will want to prevent you from doing what you want with your money and with your other pals and investors. So there is a regulator trying to control security. For example, to avoid bearer instruments, so they can enforce better anti-money laundering laws in order to tax you better. Everything disguised as customer protection. So the government doesn't want you to trade securities freely on the secondary market. So the point is, either you are using a Bitcoin-like technology to provide illegal securities, which are censorship resistant. So I'm Binance. I cannot just issue on my website a centralized security because they will shut me down. But magically, if I issue a token on the blockchain, I will be able to do some kind of regulatory arbitrage, just like Tether, in order to, I mean, maybe I tell the regulator, I will sell this security only to KYC people, but then since it's a Bitcoin, it's a blockchain token, this security can be sold on the secondary market to anonymous people without any kind of regulation, without following any kind of regulation. So if that's the goal, it makes any sense. I don't think that the Binance token is really giving any guarantee of any strict guarantee of returns from a security point of view, and I don't think it is engineered in a way that is particularly censorship resistant. If regulators want to shut down the Binance token as a security, they probably can. So 6, at least, is not an attempt at replicating money, just like Tether is not, or other kinds of token are not trying to recreate money. If you want to use money for your system, use Bitcoin. But if you want to represent something which is not money, but maybe they are rights to some kind of money nominated in Bitcoin. So if you're not trying to represent money, but a right to get some money depending on some parameters, maybe you could do a token to do that.
What do you think about Neo? It was one of the first coins which were promoted as the Ethereum killer and the Chinese Ethereum. And to some people, it looked promising because you could get some revenue from gas, and it had some dApps. But do you think it's any good?
No, I don't think so. Maybe, yeah, I would give it maybe a 3 instead of a 2, just because it's not, Ethereum is really, really, really scammy. Neo was like, at the beginning, Neo as an open source repository on GitHub, and it was just a Bitcoin fork without any modification. So basically, the Chinese Ethereum killer was just a fork of Bitcoin without modifications for months. And people was already paying a lot of money to buy this token without anything. So it's a clear pet.com style bubble, where people is paying for nothing because they think they're getting rich. And Neo is a typical situation like that. Chinese Ethereum killer, no, 3.
Okay. Ethereum Classic, you mentioned that it's maybe the better version of Ethereum or the original vision.
I agree, and I will give it a 4. So Ethereum is a collection of the worst idea that people were considering about Bitcoin back in 2012, 2013, like having computation on chain instead of just verification. It's a bad idea because it's not scalable and it lacks privacy completely. Having very, very fast block time is a bad idea because it produces a lot of orphan rate, and orphan rate centralizes the mining. So they introduced uncle reward in order to compensate for that, but that creates an unpredictable issuance schedule. So having an unpredictable issuance schedule instead of just a fixed schedule is a bad idea. So basically, every single bad idea discussing Bitcoin, or op-eval, somebody was proposing for Bitcoin an opcode that could parse and execute general code, but people just said this is nonsense because I mean, if you are producing the software for the cockpit of a plane, you don't want the software to be able to do everything. You want it, since it's a security critical application, you want the software of the cockpit to be able to do exactly a very, very well-defined set of things that maybe you can build on in complex ways, but the primitives should be very, very easy to audit and to predict and to control. So Ethereum basically took all the bad ideas out there, and they launched them as a product with a huge pre-mine and with a huge ICO. Then they spent most of the money of the ICO in marketing, but then at least at least the original Ethereum chain didn't explicitly change the rules of the system in order to bail out the financial losses of some insiders, including Vitalik Buterin, with something that people is forgetting, that shitstorm. But after the DAO, there was actually this white hat hacking team that took the money on the original on the forked chain, and they tried to sell it on the market on Bitfinex in order to profit directly. Then they got caught. It was a very, very big scandal, but people forgets everything in this market. But so Ethereum as a concept is very bad in my opinion. But before the DAO fork, it was not incredibly scammy. After the DAO bailout, I think it became very, very scammy. So I will give Ethereum Classic also. I would give them even a 5, because they started to detach from Ethereum bailout edition because of the bailout, because it was absolutely the most stupid, also a precedent for future censorship and future manipulation. So it was a very, very stupid idea. But when they separated from Ethereum because of that, they started to consider other things. Like they started to say, maybe we should have a fixed supply, or maybe we should not really have Turing completeness. We should actually have something more predictable. Or maybe we should, there were a lot of things like, basically they were recreating Bitcoin gradually. They started to get closer and closer to the Bitcoin original reasonable assumptions that were completely distorted by the Ethereum experiment. So let's give those guys a 5.
The next one is NEM.
NEM. Oh, so I think that under this point, the game is very nice, but under this point, I think that I'm losing any kind of serious distinction. So I would probably go on with they all sounds like Tron to me, like nobody is seriously following the technology of NEM. So there is not a huge debate with engineers or developers fooled into thinking something because of NEM marketing, just like is the case for other high market cap altcoins. NEM is just something that some speculators and traders tried to make money out of. So basically NEM or Tron or all the others altcoin from this point over are mostly just like gambling on a roulette. So they are going to disappear eventually. I'm quite confident that I don't think that Litecoin will ever disappear. I think that NEM will probably disappear in less than 2 years. If you look at the historical chart of altcoins from 2013, you see that there is a huge turnover. These things come and then go and disappear. Maybe they remain as a collectible in very, very low liquidity markets. Like maybe in 2020, somebody will try to collect all the 200 most famous altcoins of the years 2013, 2023. And so somebody will give some market praise to NEM, but it's not going to be anything relevant at all in very, very short time. And I think that's, I will stop here just because I think that below this point, I don't see a lot of important distinctions.
Oh, okay, because I wanted to ask you about Tezos and Zcash, which are even more delicate.
No, let's go there then. Tezos is it's still probably Tezos is a 3 because they try to, it was not just a shitcoin for traders. They also try to represent some kind of governance solution and then they started to fight with each other about governance and about the governance of money, and they went to court in Switzerland. So very, very funny. So let's say three. Zcash. Zcash, so unlike Ethereum, which is, for my opinion, a very bad idea in general, Zcash, like putting some cryptographic obfuscation in the blockchain in order to have better privacy, like Monero does, is an interesting idea. I don't say it's a good idea, because you are trading basically more privacy in exchange for less scalability, because cryptographically obfuscated transactions are bigger and slower to produce and to verify and to broadcast and to transmit. So you are giving up scalability, but you're getting some privacy, which is very important. And also you're giving up some security, because usually when you are doing cryptography, you have, that's a very generic sentence, which is not super precise, but you have to choose between binding and hiding. So you cannot have perfectly binding and perfectly hiding. So when you are hiding stuff, you could actually lose some security in the binding, and so creating inflation problems. Also in privacy coin, if you have an inflation bug, detecting the inflation bug is tricky, because it's a privacy coin. So you are also having a trade-off between security and privacy. So the idea of using zk snarks to hide the transactions in the public blockchain, in the global consensus blockchain, is not necessarily a very viable idea, but it's interesting. Of course, the way that Zcash was implemented was, in my opinion, terrible in many points of view. For example, first, they did optional privacy, so you can choose a Z transaction or a T transaction, and the Z transaction is incredibly expensive to create and to sign and to validate, and so nobody is actually using Z transactions. But since the marketing is all about privacy coin, you know, Edward Snowden told everybody that Zcash is more private than Bitcoin. So basically now you have hundreds and hundreds of people that is, I mean, you have the people just betting and gambling on the price, and that's okay. But you have people using Zcash as it was private, but everybody's using T transaction. That means that if you want, I mean, liquidity and anonymity set in Zcash is already trivially small compared to Bitcoin. So probably even with Zk snarks and Z transaction, you are easier to identify and to track on Zcash than on Bitcoin. But then people using Z transaction are such a small subset, for obvious reason, than the global set of users, that basically if you use a Zcash transaction, you are basically alone with an anonymity set of a bunch of few people. So there's no privacy at all in Zcash. That either if you are using the T transaction especially, but even the Z transaction, because you have small anonymity set. That was promoted and over promoted about privacy in a behavior I think is unresponsible. Then there was the security, the trusted setup, with the people involved in this security circus, with Peter Todd going in the middle of the desert to do the trusted setup, to check the entropy generation from the airplane, crazy stuff, like radioactive sources. And then the software, I mean, there is no guarantee that the things that these people actually run was the actual right image of the software. There is no guarantee that the stuff these people has been using during the trusted setup was actually the one used to launch Zcash. So you could have you basically create a huge security circus to do some stuff, but the things you're giving them to do that stuff is not verified in the first place or verifiable. Peter Todd is still asking for some kind of proofs that somebody should give him eventually. Then there is the trademark, like Zucco telling around that yeah, it's like an open permissionless cryptocurrency, but if you use the Zcash symbol, we are going to sue you. And that's, well, that's typically a decentralized open source permissionless system where there is a legal entity that can sue you. But above all these, the fact that you even think to create a privacy cryptocurrency, privacy oriented cryptocurrency, anonymous cryptocurrency, using a centralized US for-profit company, that screams honeypot. I mean, eGold was shut down and their creator put in jail because they created some kind of alternative currency. Bitcoin was done this way, decentralized with Satoshi Nakamoto, anonymous, precisely because otherwise Bitcoin creators would have put in jail just like eGold creators. So now these guys with face and name and surname are creating a coin like Bitcoin, but even more anonymous, using and directing everything from a centralized US company. That's very, very fishy. And then there was a very, very ugly reward model. Instead of just mining, they created the fee, like the developer fee embedded in the protocol. What does happen if they lose the private keys? So you have to update the protocol in order to change the address of the money. I mean, that's super ugly as a solution. So so probably Zcash is I'm undecided between 2 and 3, just like Ethereum or a little bit better than Ethereum, but I will go with 2.
I think you said 4 before, but after you presented all the arguments, it makes sense, I guess, to give it a 2.
Yeah, probably I basically pumped myself into lowering the grade. So I started with 4, but then I gave a very good speech and I convinced myself.
But would you say that Bitcoin is a 10?
In this scale, yes. If we are, I mean, if this scale is about something that could work, but not, we're using Bitcoin as a benchmark in this scale. Otherwise, if we are talking about money in general, then I will have to understand better which kind of criteria we're using. Because, for example, for adoption, the US dollar is better than Bitcoin. For Lindy effect, physical gold is better than Bitcoin. But for future outlook right now, I think Bitcoin looks better than US dollar, of course, and physical gold. So it really depends. It's more tricky if we put all the kind of money together. So if we are just considering cryptocurrencies using Bitcoin as a benchmark, Bitcoin is a 10 by definition.
Okay, this was incredible. And I think I'm going to ask somebody from the news department to actually write down all this classification that you've made. Maybe use a less clickbaity headline so it doesn't sound like something sensationalist. But you have made one of the most comprehensive, and I didn't expect this, actually. I expected you to say, okay, Ethereum, that's a 2. XRP, that's a 3. Bitcoin Cash, that's a 1. But you actually explained every details, and you gave an argument for everything, and that's something which I really appreciate, and you took your time with it. And I just have 2 more questions, and that's it, because we have been talking for over an hour. And I have one from Twitter, and a guy named My Legacy Kit asks, does Giacomo believe that Bitcoin one day will cover all use cases in the Exter pyramid? And if so, how? And how could it be avoided that spy agencies and other nefarious parties create private blockchains? And I'm not sure if you have an image of the Exter pyramid.
Yeah, I do. So first question, very good question. I don't think Bitcoin is going to cover all of these use cases. I think that Bitcoin could probably, if it succeed big way, if it really succeed in the hyper Bitcoinization scenario, I think that it could cover probably the gold market pretty well. Maybe not all, because gold could be like an edge. It could be like a diversification against technological apocalypse. Gold is something which is used as money since the ancient times. So maybe it could take, in very optimistic view, 80% of the market for investment gold, of course, not jewelry gold. So investment gold, yes, it could probably take most of that part. Base money, well, yes, especially if it's going to bring out of the business the base money of central bank because of tier law. Basically, it could serve as money instead of most of the base money. So those 28.8 million. So yes, bank money, this is trickier because yes, in a way, if we have an economy based in Bitcoin, then you can also have people lending out Bitcoin even with fractionary reserve in theory. But that's not very, I mean, I think that much of this part of, I think much of this part of the pyramid has been created by the structure of the state controlled and state manipulated money supply and banking system. So if Bitcoin can displace the government control on money and on finance, I don't think that 50 trillion of fractional reserve bank money would exist anymore. So my answer would be no. I don't think that Bitcoin will take over this part, because this part could basically, if not disappear, being seriously reduced. It could be nominated. You can have basically fractional reserve nominated in Bitcoin, but that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's easy. It's very hard for bank clients to check the reserves of the bank. It's very easy for exchange clients. Nobody's doing that, but it's theoretically easy to check the proof of reserve cryptographically. So that the same goes for government bonds. So if Bitcoin succeeds, I think that the government bonds part of the pyramid is going to be seriously reduced. So it's not that Bitcoin is going to take it over. Is more that it's going to basically disappear or be seriously reduced. So it's not that Bitcoin is really taking over all the pyramid. Is that it's taking over a part of the pyramid, making the other parts of the pyramids probably disappear. Then you have corporate and municipal bonds. Let's just say corporate, which is basically credits, credit. This could still exist, and Bitcoin can be used. I mean, you can, in a post-hyperconization world, you can use Bitcoin to borrow or to lend, but that doesn't mean that that wealth should be counted inside the market cap of Bitcoin. Same goes with non-monetary commodities. I don't think that non-monetary commodities will be somehow included in Bitcoin. Maybe the Bitcoin blockchain will serve as a platform to trade around crypto securities or crypto collectibles or crypto derivatives, but I don't think that will enter the Bitcoin market cap itself. And then the derivatives. The derivatives, just like the bank money or the government bonds, I think that the explosion of derivative markets is in part a consequence of the manipulation of the economy by the government and bailouts and moral hazard and no skin in the game and externalities. So a Bitcoin world would probably make derivative explosion much more difficult, because when you lose, and the government cannot bail you out if the government cannot tax people with inflation, or if collecting money with normal taxation gets more difficult because of financial privacy. So for many reasons, it could get more difficult to bail out failed banks, and that would probably redimension. It would probably reduce heavily government bonds, bank money with fractional reserve, and derivatives. So my answer would be no. Second question, how could be avoided a spy agency or other nefarious parties create private blockchain? It cannot, but I don't see what a private blockchain could achieve. So let's just them play with private blockchains, but they cannot do anything with private blockchains. So if you mean how can you avoid that they are going to create something to compete with Bitcoin? They can, because if they want to compete with hard and dark money, which is Bitcoin, so money that can be that cannot be inflated or manipulated as a supply, and that cannot be easily censored or spied upon, then you have to create something like Bitcoin. And so we just stay with Bitcoin. And if you want to create something different from Bitcoin, for example, manipulated or easy to censor, then you are not competing with Bitcoin. So I don't really see any problem. Let them play with private blockchain. I think that right now already private blockchain are perceived like a joke by many people in the fintech industry. It was a buzzword until last year. Now people is understanding that it's mostly a joke. So yeah, let's build private blockchains. Not a problem.
I feel sorry that this is the last topic that we discussed because it should have been earlier in the interview. But I really liked your presentation with the B Foundation, even though it's not supposed to be called a foundation and it's going to be the B. And I had an interview with Jameson Lopp, and he had very kind words to say about your involvement in Europe. And he said that he wanted to do the same in the United States, but didn't have the same legislative background to work with. And what do you have to say about this project? Do you think that it will grow in time? Do you think that the next generation of blockchain developers will actually get educated through the B? Do you think that at one point you will actually lobby for Bitcoin in countries, or are you trying to stay away as a purpose?
So we will stay away on purpose from lobbying. That was not the. So I appreciate that you liked the presentation. Many people in Riga liked it, but many people abroad, just like a little bit like the maximalist presentation, the partial information was probably very easy to misunderstand. So many people didn't perceive the again the irony, sarcasm in some of the choices of the name and some of the slides, and so they started to assume that we were going to create something like to represent officially Bitcoin, which is not the case, or to lobby for Bitcoin with governments, which is not the case. What we want to create is basically a platform exchange to match demand and offer for open source development donation. That's all. That's all I've done for the last 3 years. Outside my for-profit job. For profit, I was consulting and teaching, and non-profit, I was basically donating to Bitcoin projects, no string attached. Hopefully, the B will continue what I've done for 3 years with a bigger set of people, with a bigger reach, with a more sound legal structure that Elena Vranova thought about. So I'm super happy that that Jameson could also be part of it. Mainly, I think I will, in a good way, use Jameson mostly as what we call a reviewer. So the idea of the B is that there will be a hierarchical tree of projects, and there will be donors donating to some node of the tree, and there will be developers claiming the donation like a bounty because of some development work that they did. So that we need people in order to the donor itself, mostly, at least in my experience, it doesn't want to directly project manage a project, or to directly assess the code, test the code, and decide. They want to donate. Mostly they are not, often they're not even technical people. So we need people that can get the money in operating as an escrow, and then when the developer is submitting some proposal, they can evaluate the proposal and release the bounty or not, or ask for modification. Jameson Lopp will be one of these guys in my expectations, and so far he accepted. There was a lot of misconceptions about the role of the famous people I called on stage. It doesn't mean that we will have like everybody in the same company centralizing Blockstream and Casa Hodl or stuff like that. Everybody will keep their normal job. Jameson will work for Casa Hodl, which is a very cool company, by the way. Alena will work on Casa Hodl as well. I will work on my for-profit business. Adam Beck will work on Blockstream. Everybody there will work on their project, and but they will also be somehow requested to evaluate bounty claims inside the B website. So I had the occasion, the announcement created a lot of curiosity. So I discussed the B with a lot of people, also in interviews and podcasts. So I started to feel a bit uncomfortable because I'm talking a lot and I'm not delivering anything yet. So I will feel much more comfortable to talk about the B when we finally have the legal entity in Liechtenstein incorporated and the software of the donation flow up and running. I look forward for that. I hope we can do that before November, but I'm not committing myself because these things are always a bit unpredictable. And when we start to see the first donation flows, I think it will be clear to everybody what the hell we are doing with the B. Not lobbying, not representing Bitcoin, going out to fund development efforts and some effort in marketing to debunk myths and misconceptions and lies, which is basically what I've tried to do during this interview as well.
That's great, and I'm happy that we had this interview. Grazie Giacomo.
Prego, ottimo italiano.
Parlo un po' di italiano.
Perfetto.
You wrote for Crypto Insider a few months ago.
Just once, unfortunately. I wanted to more often, but I'm good at giving talks because I just talk a lot, as you have seen. But when I have to write, I rewrite every sentence 100 times. So I'm so slow and perfectionist, and so I wrote something which I think it was a good article about the UASF and all the stuff. I like the article that came out of that, but I promised to Crypto Insider a lot of other articles that I never delivered. So hopefully I will start writing again, but I'm so slow at writing. I will need like a ghostwriter recording me talking all the time and writing it down.
It's okay because this interview will be transcribed, so everything that you said will appear in text. You can get it, you can use it for articles, do whatever you want with it.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, so have a great rest of your day, and thank you for this interview.
Have a great day too, and thank you. Bye.